Hello, welcome back for a new session. This time we're going to talk about onboarding of new teams within a product group, so all working at one product. There are two scenarios that we want to address. The first scenario is where we add one team by another, generally done when we require a bit more capacity to execute upon the known needs. And the second scenario is when we have lots of teams to add at once. This is generally done when we need to take into account a large new scope of things to do. We're going to explain this or explore this specifically in a Scrum environment, giving some insights on how I dealt with the product backlog when growing large amount of teams. Stay tuned. Our starting point. A one-team organization, one person defining product strategy, go-to-market, thus value. One product backlog to support the team focusing on the right problems to solve, using the most popular Agile methodology out there being Scrum. This could be a startup, having one product being one team large. I know, for most of you out there, that's not reality. Then again, the patterns explained in this talk are still valid. Except of one team to start with, you might want to start with 5-6 teams at once. That's the only difference there is. You keep adding new teams within the same structures, one team by another, learning how system dynamics change and improve on them. When working from a single product backlog, from my experience, I can state that cross-team learning happens naturally. Multi-team refinement sessions, multi-team planning sessions, multi-team review sessions are good leverages for shared learning. Next to these events, many other practices have been documented to help teams with cross-team learning. You can find those in the last book's website and for sure also other methodologies out there. Even though recommended differently in many articles, I do not see an immediate need to continuously mingle people in different teams. Meaning growing teams by adding one person at a time and then split when appropriate, or splitting the teams first and then adding new people continuously into those split cells. Those are all examples of continuously mingling people in different teams. Breaking up teams continuously when growing rapidly has a huge cost on their overall productivity and related predictability of plans you distill from that. As cross-team learning is ingrained when working from a single product backlog, you can keep existing teams intact and keep their productivity plus minus as it was before, and thus also its related predictability of plans. The new teams will slowly learn by participating in the general practices of working from a single product backlog, eventually contributing to the overall product group's productivity. So you can keep adding team by team, even if the team starts out with a single person and others join later. You only mess with the productivity of a small part of the product group and not the entire group. You keep adding team by team until it hurts too much and teams don't figure things out to truly collaborate. Or you notice a continuous and organic split in focus between different groups of teams, where it's always the same group of teams having focus on certain aspects of the product. In my current experience, up to 4-6 teams, maybe in exceptional cases a little bit more, can share the same focus growing their product. So naturally, when those boundaries are exceeded, you'll observe groups of teams having a slightly different focus. When that's the case, or it hurts too much, it's better to split. A small warning though, splitting with less than 6 teams isn't a good idea. If you were thinking about that, then it could indicate you and your teams didn't learn enough on how to truly enable cross-team collaboration. I would recommend to explore experiments in that domain. They have been documented by others having the same challenges as you have. Do that first before even thinking about splitting things up. Anyhow, let's assume cross-team collaboration is at par and a split is required. That would mean that we make the situation that actually exists more explicit, clearly showing that there are 2 different focus areas. Adding an attribute to identify which items in the product backlog belong to which area and thus group of teams. Possibly expanding the product owner team with 2 persons, each focusing on one of the areas. It might work perfectly, and please try so. I tend to end up with a slightly different approach in relation to the product backlog. An approach where I split off information into separate area backlogs, where the extra persons in the product owner team mainly focus on the separate area backlogs. By having a higher focus on those separate area backlogs, we prevent a bit of the invent work syndrome. Why? The product owner is the one going with strategic goals, serious customer problems within the overall product backlog. That product backlog is driving everything else, and not the person focusing, or worse, even identifying themselves with the somehow defined area within the product. The latter would lead to silo thinking again, and we want to avoid that at all costs. We want to keep focus on the whole product, not parts of it, the whole market we serve, and as such optimize and maximize the impact we make in it. Now, how does this pattern work? What granularity is in the different backlogs? First things first, there is a connection or relation between the items in the area backlogs and the product backlog. They get connected with an ID or other type of direct link between each other. The items in the area backlog tend to be a lot smaller and, most importantly, considered ready to be worked on in any of the upcoming iterations. This ready state is not the goal for the items in the product backlog. As a guide on granularity of items in these area backlogs, I tend to grow into a situation where a single team can handle something between 4 to 6 items per iteration. Less would indicate a team is taking too much risk of failure, and thus the items, their granularity is still too large. A lot more than 6 would indicate a team is working a plan, did spend too much time analyzing things up front, and thus the items, their granularity is still too narrow. These top items in the area backlogs are connected to the top items in the product backlog, where I use a rule of thumb to have 3 to 4 items completely done per area, per iteration. The general product backlog dynamics are still valid here. We need to finish items at the top of the backlog within a single iteration. The granularity of the items in the product backlog is different though, as we are now talking about a group of teams and not a single team anymore. The items, their granularity ends up to be larger versus those in the area backlogs. How can you prevent now a mess between those different layers of backlogs? Well, you set some limits. The area backlog contains the detailed items for 2 to 3 iterations ahead, at maximum. Beyond that iteration limit, items should not be detailed out at all. The information is captured by more coarse-grained items in the product backlog anyhow. What if items go beyond the hard iteration limit? Well, they get deleted, meaning that the details get deleted. The coarse-grained information is still in the items in the product backlog, so nothing gets lost. These coarse-grained items will be reconsidered once they become in scope to be taken up into one of the iterations to come. This way you can make the best decisions possible, with the best and latest information at hand. You don't get stuck with decisions based on outdated information from months, not to say years ago. You know, each iteration your product is changing. Each iteration you get a better understanding of your market needs. So each iteration you get smarter. Having a pattern in place that allows you to benefit from that smartness is great. By the way, I also put a hard limit on the product backlog, like the absolute necessary forecasting time needed in the context of the organization, generally ending up with something between 1 to 2 years. And then I also teach people how to keep the total amount of items in that product backlog below 200-300 at maximum, but that's out of scope of this talk. Voila, scenario 1, keep adding one team until it hurts too much and then split. Or better, make things more explicit. Let's jump to scenario 2. Adding a lot of teams and thus also scope to the product. Without extra scope, adding many teams at once does not make sense at all. This is a situation you need to handle a bit different. First, we prepare the new scope to enter the product backlog using the same mechanisms as mentioned before. Extracting details out of the product backlog into an area backlog, reducing the total amount of items in the product backlog. This in order to be able to add more new ones from the new scope we have to address, and don't get overwhelmed at start. Next, the teams, old and new, perform a refinement, meaning a collaborative functional technical analysis session to explore the new scope to address. I recommend a mix of people from old teams with people from new teams in order to learn together and make the entire onboarding process a little easier. Once new scope is somehow understood and the first steps forward are identified, we extract items into the product backlog and the new area backlog. Voila, we're almost there, ready to go. What about the teams? The product owner decides on an investment spread over the two areas. In other words, deciding on a capacity spread amongst them. It could be 50-50, 60-40, but don't go into 80-20, as that would indicate that the areas are not properly defined and some thinking needs to go into that first. In this case, let's assume there is an okay investment spread ratio. The teams choose which area they want to contribute to according to the spread ratio set forward, preferably a mix of old and new teams to smoothen the entire onboarding process. Alternatively, you might consider having a completely new team self-design session, mixing up people from old and new teams, but that's off scope of this talk, and to my current experience, in many cases can be avoided. Now you have seen two different patterns growing teams within a product group. I have been using these patterns of growing teams within different product groups for years. I can promise you it's going to be slow at first and a very bumpy ride. Each organization is different. Each product is different. Each team is different. So at the start of a growth journey, many learnings need to be absorbed. Once most of the learnings have been absorbed, things start to smooth out and you can rapidly onboard new teams whenever you need. Either one by one or many at once. It all becomes easier and hey, maybe even fun instead of misery. Even more importantly, onboarding starts to go faster and faster as you continuously incorporate the learnings and improve. The more you practice, the more you exercise, the fitter you become. It's the same thing in other sports. This practicing and exercising will result in a way to onboard new teams that you'll notice an exponential curve popping up. As mentioned in the 11 Laws of the Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, number 6 by the way, faster is slower. Go slow to go fast. Of course, there's a lot more to say in relation to multi-team product groups, and this talk was focused just on one aspect. In the end, it's all about learning how to learn as an organization, a key contributor to acquire fast onboarding skills. It works for small organizations growing into unicorns. It works for adoptions having parallel organizations with new work models, absorbing the old parts along the way. Do try it out, share your experience in the comments. Thanks and see you. Bye bye.